Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Dear Umair. This is a special episode called Dear Umair, Meet Professor Salter. And who I'm referring to is Professor Stephen Salter, who insists that we call him Stephen, so we'll honor that request. And Stephen, I'm going to invite you to say hello in a moment, but first I want you to understand the context of this. I think that would only be fair. Umair Haque is one of my favorite writers, modern writers. He publishes about an article a day, around 6 articles per week on topics such as global warming, the effects of social media on the world, the Taliban, what's happening in Texas, women's rights, all kinds of really important issues. But he also goes really deep into the need for a new story for humanity and a radical transformation in civilization. And so what we do twice a week, we have this series called Dear Umair, which we haven't published yet in any kind of a significant way. We're about to publish the whole thing as a series, which then will get added on 2 new episodes per week. What we typically do is we'll read one of Umair's latest articles, and then we'll have a conversation about it, right? And the one we did a week ago on September 10th is probably my favorite, because we really went deep into some fundamental topics pertaining to literally the whole of the planetary transformation that we must all undertake in order to solve our problems. We cannot do this piecemeal. We must do this as a holistic process. And we also highlighted the urgency and importance of collective intelligence as being the key driver of this entire holistic process, because what's on the table here and the myriad transformations which need to happen holistically is precisely vastly multidimensional. It is so vast, it is so big, it's too much for any one mind to handle. We need the collective intelligence of, ultimately millions of us working on the myriad different aspects of it. Marco put in the chat, that's a great idea, Marco. We're gonna go ahead and in a moment spotlight Stephen to give an introduction to himself. And so I first wanted to give an introduction to Dear Umair. I think I've accomplished that. Next, what I'd love to do when you're ready, Stephen, is invite you to just share. You can just talk, and then I can show some images while you're talking of what you're proposing. And Marco's got an image up on the screen. I'll just highlight it really quickly. This is an image of some sailing vessels. You don't see sails, but these cylinders are actually incredibly efficient at converting wind into mechanical power through rotation, which then drive these pumps, which spray ocean water, filtered ocean water into the air, creating bright white marine clouds, which then reflect sunlight back into space. And then what I'd love to do is after Stephen has presented for as long as you'd like, a few minutes, whatever, just a brief overview, then we can delve into a deep conversation about what it's going to take, not only to get this specific solution implemented, but all vital solutions, of which there are many, which are urgent to varying degrees, but all of them must operate together holistically if we're going to save life on Earth, including but not limited to humanity. So with that, are there any comments from anyone in the room about what I'm saying here and the overall flow before I pass the talking feather to Stephen?
One question is, would it help if I was able to show some slides to you?
Absolutely. I think that'd be very helpful. So let's go.
I'll get them.
Yeah.
And I might need some help about getting them put into
Yeah, there's a button at the bottom of your Zoom window that says screen share. And so
Right.
you'll click on that, and then you'll select, but you'll first open the slides themselves in PowerPoint or whatever application.
Yeah.
Okay, looks like you've accomplished it.
Have I done that? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. And then if you can go ahead and do full screen
Right.
on those slides, that would be great.
Right. Let's go. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Now that should wind it up if I go there. Okay. This is just to. Shall I take it from now?
Oh, please. Yeah, yes. No, that slide is not in full screen. There should.
Everybody here knows about the dangers, but I thought one picture to remind you of that is what's happening in Greenland as the top snow melts and it's exposing all the volcanic ash and soot from bushfires and so on. And that's now absorbing heat. This is showing you that we really shouldn't trust the IPCC that much, because they were predicting how much the ice would be changing. Their range of estimates was this blue path down here. The average is the black line, and the red is what actually happened. So the IPCC are not good at predicting how quickly things are going to go. This was a very recent events of what's happening in Africa and Australia at the same time. And this can be linked to the temperature gradient across the Indian Ocean. It's called the Indian Ocean Dipole. And the next one is this diagram of the Keeling curve, which is remorselessly rising. This is perhaps a slight reduction in the acceleration here. And along here, I've got all the previous COP conferences. And a statistician looking at that data on its own might come to the conclusion that having conferences is going to increase the CO2 concentration. We don't think that's really the truth, but the evidence is that it is. Somebody said repeating an experiment and getting different results. At the moment, the policy is to try and cut down emissions of carbon to zero by 2050. And I would argue that this is necessary, but it's inadequate. We will be left with all the greenhouse gases we've got in the atmosphere at the moment, plus all the ones which we'll be emitting between now and the zero date. So that isn't enough. We have to do it, but it isn't enough. We have to do some removal of carbon from the atmosphere, and we have to do some direct cooling. Right, the next slide here is showing with a little black dot here, the total human energy consumption in 2020 of all forms: oil, gas, coal, nuclear, wind, tidal, the whole lot is the area of that. And that information is to be compared with the solar input, which is this lot here. The numbers I've got for this came from BP, who produce an energy analysis statistics, which are really, really useful with a lot of information there. And in honor of them, I'm calling this a boop. That's the amount of energy that we use in a year. And there's 9,000 boops of solar energy coming in. That means that really quite a small change in the solar input is going to solve the problem, which is very reassuring. Okay, well now the whole key to this whole project is this guy here called Sean Toomey, and he had an airplane where you could fly around and you could measure solar energy coming down from above and the reflected energy coming up from below from the clouds. And then he could fly into the cloud, scoop up some cloud drops and measure how many there were in a cubic centimeter and how big they were. And he did a lot of work like this and wrote several papers that are quite hard going. But it all boils down to the fact that if you have a large number of small drops, you get more reflection from a cloud than if you have exactly the same amount of liquid water as a smaller number of bigger drops. And if you've heard people say the dark storm clouds are gathering, that's a demonstration of it. And there's another demonstration here I've got is these are glass balls in both jars, and we got 4mm diameter glass balls in this jar and 40 micron glass balls in this jar, and you can see that's got a reflectivity about 0.6, I guess, and this is about 0.9. So that's a lovely demonstration of the Toomey effect. There's a bit more, which I can show in this diagram. We've got two graphs with the x-axis being the number of condensation nuclei in a cubic centimeter. All right. Well, the number of cloud drops really in a cubic centimeter, and the different curves here are varying the cloud depth. There's 1,000 meters up at the top here and 100 meters on the bottom here for a particular liquid water content of just 0.3 milliliters per cubic meter of air. This is a fairly middling one. And so thicker clouds are reflecting more. We've got reflectivity up here. And it's usually between 25 and 75%. And these are for different lines of different initial cloud thickness. And over here, we've got almost the same information, except here that I'm fixing the cloud depth at 300 meters, which is again a middling number, and I'm changing the liquid water content from 0.1 up to 1. So the 0.3 is somewhere in the middle. And you'll notice that the curves are almost the same shape, the same sort of slope, which is a good sign. What I'm next doing is shown by the black lines, where I'm doing a series of doublings of the nuclei concentration. So if I pick any of the curve, let's pick the red curve here, a very, very low nuclei number, 10 per cubic centimeter. I'm going to double it, going from the red out to here, and then going back to my red curve coming up to here. And that'll then double it again, going from 20 to 40, and then going back to my red curve, doubling it again, going from 40 to 80, and then go back to the red curve. And you can see the size of these steps is really very similar. And this is showing that the cloud depth doesn't matter very much, and the liquid water content doesn't very much. What really matters is the nuclei concentrations. This is the really important bit. And we can therefore really concentrate our effort on that. Now, the next thing you need to know about this is that you can't just make a drop of a cloud simply by getting the relative humidity up to 100%. You actually have to have it a little bit more than 100%, and you have to have a thing called a condensation nucleus to start the drop growing. All right, and the size of the mass of the seed depends on the chemical nature of the seed material. And this was studied by a chap called Kohler, and he will tell you what happens with different masses or different liquid drop diameters of an aerosol getting into the air. And if you have a very small one, this blue line here, which should be 2 times 10 to the minus 17 grams of salt, that's a very small thing. The relative humidity just changes the size of the drop as you move up and down the slope here. If you can get it above this point here, above 100.7, and over the top of this, it can then slide down here and it'll keep on growing, taking more and more water out of the atmosphere and coming down the slope here. So what Kohler is telling us is how much, what size of liquid water or how much grams of salt we need to be sure of getting over the hump and then going subsequently. And the one that I'd like to have is at 0.8 of a micron, 800 nanometers of liquid seawater at 3.5%, which has 10 to the minus 14 grams of salt in it. And it's the amount of salt that matters, not the amount of water that's sprayed. And the size of the drop that it'll grow into will depend entirely on what the relative humidity is. So the drop that we make would be down 0.8 of micron. That would come up, and if depending on what the humidity is up here, water will condense on it, moving it up this line here. And if it goes above a hump, which is about that point there, then it'll go on growing into a proper cloud drop. So that's a very important bit of physics that's key to this. Now, John Latham, who is the guy who thought about all this, thought that we should look at spraying seawater into the air in mid-ocean and make new seeds, new condensation nuclei for the making the clouds that are there be whiter and brighter. And he worked out how much you would need to spray to get how much cooling. He was amazed how little seawater you'd need to spray for the whole world to cool it, to remove all the heating we've been up to now. And it worked out, if you could have in the right place, about 10 cubic meters of water a second for the whole world. That's amazing, isn't it? We're very worried at the moment about the Arctic ice because it has lots of effects on how the jet stream works and various currents. And what we want to do is to be able to cool in different places at different times. And here is an amazing picture showing that we've got here months through the year in the horizontal line, and we've got a latitude, so that's the North Pole up here, and that's the South Pole down here. And to your astonishment, there is more heat going into the South Pole in December than there is into the equator. That's 550 watts per square meter into the South Pole, and only about 425 in the equator. The reason is it's coming in over the whole 24 hours, and here it's only coming in for a fraction of the day. Okay, well, the next thing is, where do we want to do it? And this is a thing it's called cloud susceptibility, which is a very good indicator of where we're going to be a good place. And you'll notice that the red and yellow bits are really, very good, and the dark blue is not so good at all, but the cyans are not that bad. And clearly we want to have something that can move around, migrate in different places. That's January and that's July. And the cyan, the light blue, is not as good as the red, but it's 50%. So it's not completely stupid. The other thing we need to know about is where the clean air is. The Toomey thing showed that it's doubling the number of condensation nuclei gives you about 5% increase in reflectivity. So it's much easier to treat a clean air system than a dirty air system. And this thing shows you how many condensation nuclei there are in different parts of the ocean in different seasons. That's December, January, February, and March, April, May. And don't go and do it where these red bits are, because they've got 100 per cubic centimeter, and that's a lot harder than doubling 20. Over land, there's about 1,000 per cubic centimeter, up to 5,000, depending on whether it's industrial city or in the desert or not. So the difference between sea and land and condensation nuclei concentration is really very, very large. So we've got to do things in the ocean, and we've got to move around, and we've got to get some energy as well. And the moving around bit, yeah, we also don't want to have to keep refueling and feeding and giving leave and medical attention to crew. This is the pinnacle of technology of sailing boats. And imagine that you are a sailor who's having to reef a sail here because the wind is getting up too much, and it's in the middle of the night and it's raining, and the boat is rolling terribly, and you've got to tie reef knots and you're perched up there. That is really hard work, and very brave people doing it. It's not perhaps the best way do propulsion. And this thing here shows a new way of doing it. It's comparing a sailing ship, which is all these conventional sails here, with technology using things called Flettner rotors, which are these spinning cylinders here. And Flettner got two ships with conventional sails, and he ripped the sails off one of them and he put rotors on instead. Now you need to put some energy in to make them spin, but they give a much, much bigger thrust than an airplane wing for because of a thing called the Magnus effect. And they had a race from the Baltic to Edinburgh, and the Flettner rotor boat won the race. And then it sailed to New York, and then everyone was impressed by this, got orders for quite a lot more. He got orders for 5 more, built one of them, and then the 1929 depression came along and all the orders were cancelled. So he picked the wrong time. The one that we are looking at, this is N-1 design with rotors here that are spinning. There's an electric motor at the bottom which is making it spin. And the force that it generates is at 90 degrees to the wind direction. So if you had the wind coming from here and this spinning around like that, then you get a big suction to move it in that direction. And we need to generate some power to make the spray and filter it and put it through nozzles and so on. And we began with having propellers, big propellers acting like turbines that were in the water. We found that they had a big thrust in the wrong direction. There was a force on it trying to oppose the vertical motion. So we needed an awful big thrust to overcome the drag of these propellers. These are using a different idea. They're using things called hydrofoils, which are making the boat fly rather than float. There's air underneath the hull here. If it's not moving, it'll sink down and have to get its buoyancy from these floats here. But if the wind is enough to get it up to about 3 meters a second, then these can fly on these foils. And the hydrofoil boats are now used quite a lot. There's about half of them in the recent round the world race. And they're doing a really credible job now, but we're making a bit of a difference here because these have got variable pitch. And if you increase the pitch angle of this, so you'll get an upward force on that foil, and at the same time you get a downward force on that foil, you can make these vertical forces pump hydraulic rams, and that'll give you the energy that you want. At the same time, making that one go up, you make this one go down and that one go up. So I'm balancing the torque across the length of this fuselage, and I'm getting all the energy that I want to make the spray. It would look like this from the frontal view, where that one's gone up and this one's come down. And with this one, we're pumping hydraulic rams vertically. The later design has the rams horizontal, but that doesn't make much difference. And just to convince you, this is a hydrofoil boat with a dinghy. It's called a moth. And this boat and this chap here are flying on that little foil here. Okay. And there's another much smaller foil here, which is being used to adjust the height of this above the sea. And that's controlled by this little wand here. All right. So there's lots of video of this on the web. If you put moth hydrofoil in, you'll get pictures. And they go very steadily, even in quite big waves. And they must be terrific fun to drive. Well, the way we want to make spray, there's lots of different ways we thought about doing it. And the one we want decided on, not everybody agrees, is a technique that was worked out by Lord Rayleigh, who did lots of different kinds of physics. And he took this photograph in 1878. And if you imagine what the technology for photography was in those days, I think this is an amazing achievement. What he's got is a jet of water coming in from the left here. And as it comes along here, it grows little bulges which get more and more definite. And they then break up into drops like this. And he worked out what pressures and sizes of nozzles you need to get whatever drops. And we have modeled all this in modern computer software. You can do your own demo if you want. If you are in a shower, you can put your finger right up to the shower head and the flow of water will feel steady. And then you move it down the jet stream and you'll feel it pulsing. And then you'll end up with more and more pulsation. This is a drawing of N-2, where I had a fuselage skin. And you can see that there's a whole lot of sockets in the hull. And there's things plugged into the sockets with all the equipment for filtration and battery storage and controls and electric motor drives and so on. And the idea is that these can be rotated 45 degrees and pulled out, and another one can be pushed in to replace it. So it's like the boards of a 1960s computer, where you didn't mess around trying to look at a particular chip. You would replace an entire board and the thing could be working very quickly. So I want to be able to change all the difficult bits in a few minutes. I think this will be right, at least for the first ones. And there's spray heads up here. The spray is coming out through nozzles that are etched in a silicon wafer. And we have 200 million nozzles in each wafer, and there can be 30 wafers if we want. And the spray is coming out the back here. And this thing can rotate, and it will be pointing down whichever way the wind direction wants to be. So these are being thrown out into the wind. And to give the size of it, that's me there, standing on it. In those days, the waterline length was 45 meters, and it's now I've shortened it, and I put various things into the same compartment. So it's now 28 meters long, and it would weigh, in that one was 90 tons. The present one is 65 tons. It'll probably go up a bit, but I'm hoping to keep it under 90. I've got these foils here being wiggled on as a keel. So you won't be able to see too much of the detail in this engineering drawing, but this is in a computer package which allows you to measure every dimension. If I tried to put dimensions in this, it would be impossible to read. Now, a wonderful result of all this is a test of climate models done in Norway by Camilla Stern, if that's how you pronounce it. And she was increasing the number of condensation nuclei in the oceans wherever there was a cloud, a low cloud. And all she did was to increase the nuclei by 50% under the clouds. And you can see a very useful amount of cooling in the north here, like that in Siberia, to keep the permafrost bottled up and retain the ice. And fairly even cooling down here. Now, you'd be able to perhaps do an even more sophisticated thing rather than just looking at where the clouds were, if you had a really good climate model and people who understood the climate perhaps a bit better than we do now. The other encouraging thing was that there is an effect on precipitation, and the blue-green here is showing that we are increasing precipitation by 10 or maybe even 20% in the drought-stricken regions. The Sahara and Australia and South Africa, they had terrible droughts there a little while ago, and in Mexico. And we are getting reductions in precipitation in the brown areas. And most of the really big reductions are over the sea, where people really won't worry about it too much. Here we've got maybe 1 or 2% over the Central America, but there is a very encouraging result with that. Another thing you can do is shown in this thing. This is Whitney and Hobgood collecting all the hurricane data that they can get. And they've got a measure of what they call hurricane density, which is in meters per second. And I think they also use a pressure drop. So here's how bad the hurricane is. And here's the sea surface temperature. And you can see that a reduction in sea surface temperature would be really rather good if you were worried about hurricanes. And I'm a bit puzzled that there's a gap here. Maybe this is when the instruments were damaged. No good. This is how hurricanes start. A great many of them start off on the African side of the Atlantic. and they get more intense as they move across, and they tend to move to the right. Okay, so this is what we would do if we wanted to prevent this, is to have spray vessels cruising this area here, measuring the water temperature, the satellite can do that as well, and adjusting the number of them to reduce the sea surface temperatures to what the countries in this region thought would be better for them. No one's going to be able to say to Americans, we promise you'll never get another hurricane, because they know they'd be sued to death. American lawyers are very effective in that. What they could do is they can get all the governments in this region to look at the map here and say, what temperature would you actually like to have? What would make you feel more comfortable? And tell us what it is, and we'll try and get that pattern to you. And you can pay us according to how close we can get. And you can have insurance premiums reduced accordingly. So this is a way in which you can have a commercial group earning a living. That is a picture of a Corvette, and they cost £60,000 each in 1940. And that allows us to get an estimate of the cost of spray vessels, which is perhaps £3 million or $4 million in mass production. And this is how many you need to control the sea level, or save the barrier reef, or save the Arctic ice, or moderate a hurricane. And that's my details. So there's an instant potted presentation. And what we are fighting is the assumption that just getting rid of CO2 to zero, CO2 emissions, is going to be adequate, and it isn't. Right, I'll move that down. Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful. If I could ask you to stop screen share, or I think.
Right. Okay. I need to find where that is. Stop share there.
There you go. There you go.
Stop share. Right. I can give you that in PowerPoint if you like.
Yeah, I think it's still screen sharing. But I can fix that, I think.
I'm keep clicking stop share and it's not.
Yeah, no, I think I can.
Oh, it's on it now.
There you go. There you got it. Okay, great. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you so much for that presentation. And it was there's quite a lot of technical detail in there. I'm an engineer, and actually, back in the day, I was a graduate student of hydroclimatology at MIT, a very relevant field to all this. And for all my expertise, when I first saw this presentation, I just had so many questions. And so I reached out to Stephen and requested a meeting via Zoom. He was very gracious to grant me a very generous chunk of time, and also brought in his main computer modeler, Dr. Alan Gadian from the University of Leeds in England, and we spent several hours going through it. There's a lot of detail here, right? And it's all important, but the bottom lines are really two, right? Number one, we can cool the planet using marine cloud brightening. And number two, where we deploy these vessels to do marine cloud brightening matters, and it has localized impact. So there's the whole planetary objective of cooling the planet as a whole, but then there's a whole bunch of other localized effects that we also care about.
It's not just where, it's when. We've got season and region.
Thank you. So where and when?
The monsoon and say it's too late or it's too early, let's shift.
Thank you for that. Perfect. So there's where and when. Where and when has a huge impact on all these local effects, such as reducing or eliminating hurricanes, reducing the rate of melting of Arctic sea ice, increasing rainfall in Australia to reduce wildfires, reducing rainfall in areas that are prone to flooding, like East Africa, et cetera. So there's both the macro, cooling the planet as a whole, as well as the very localized. And so I want to bring this back to a more general conversation and expand the scope of the conversation a bit to the bigger question of, there's two really big questions. So if I was Umair or part of Umair's audience, Umair has a bunch of amazing folks who read his articles and comment on them. And that's why we're doing this series, Dear Umair, to bring it from that modality of writing, reading, and commenting asynchronously through text to this new modality of synchronous conversation. And so if I were Umair and members of Umair's audience, I'd really have two questions. Number one, is, okay, I get it, marine cloud brightening, but do we really want to do this? Because I've heard a whole bunch of counter arguments to geoengineering, right? And that's a rich subject unto itself. Okay, great. And then the second set of questions is, okay, suppose that I've gone through all the arguments and all the analysis, and we determined that, yes, we need to do marine cloud brightening. Then there's the question of, well, how do we actually get it done, given how relatively unknown it is, given that there are some technological hurdles that still need to be overcome, filtration amongst them, which as an engineer, from my perspective, is that that's very solvable. It still needs to be solved. It's very solvable, but work still needs to be done on it. But then there are the broader questions of, how do we get it done from a political standpoint, right? From an international policy standpoint, how do we get the relevant nations to agree to this? And then last but not least, we have from a financial standpoint, how do we make this a viable concern, given that there is probably on the order of billions of dollars of investment required, a tiny drop in the bucket relative to the size of the global economy and other expenditures, notably military. But a few $1 billion is rounding error in terms of combined government budgets. And so this whole set of questions, right, for which I don't want to presuppose any answers, right? Ask all the questions you have. It's perfectly fair to look at this with a skeptical perspective. But what we discussed 1 week ago today, last Friday, September 10th, was a scenario that we envisioned around applying collective intelligence to all of these questions simultaneously, right? So here's a thought experiment for you. There's half a dozen of us in this room right now. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that 8 people per room is kind of a nice sweet spot for grappling with a given question. What if we had 1,000 such Zoom rooms going in parallel, whether Zoom rooms in their own right or breakout rooms to a central Zoom room, doesn't matter, but 8,000 separate conversations happening in parallel, where you could imagine that different rooms are addressing different specific questions, right? Some of them could be focused on the various technologies needed to do marine cloud brightening. Others could be at a higher level. Hey, what are the different options for cooling the planet? And where does marine cloud brightening fit, if at all, within those? There are those who believe that only more organic forms of cooling the planet should be considered. And those are all fair questions. And so let's have focused conversations on each, which can then support each other in a holistic way. So you can imagine a taxonomy of topics, right, that spans all the relevant questions. For example, how much is the planet currently overheating? We're taking in more heat from the sun than we're emitting through infrared radiation, which is the only mechanism through which we can cool the planet, through which the planet can cool herself at present, is through emitting infrared radiation. So the first question is, how much is the planet currently overheating? How much worse is it getting by the day? Another question is, a set of questions are around, what are the predicted impacts of this continued overheating, including the cascading impacts, crossing through tipping points, melting the last of the Arctic ice, et cetera, which of course decreases reflectivity of the natural mirror of the Arctic sea ice, increases absorption of sunlight, basically makes it even worse, increases the rate of planetary overheating. Grappling with those two questions gives us an indication of the urgency of cooling the planet, which in my perspective is absolutely extreme at this point. Words can barely describe how urgent it is, which then brings us to the questions of, okay, what are our options for cooling the planet? Umair, you have suggested that by planting trees alone, we can cool the planet, right? Let's have conversations around that. Let's have one conversation around how many trees could be planted under different scenarios. What would be the impacts of that in terms of carbon removal over time? And would that be sufficient, even in an extreme scenario where we plant trees in every conceivable place on Earth in which we can plant them? It still takes a number of years for those saplings to reach a size where they're sequestering significant amounts of carbon. But again, let's be very objective about all this. Let's get answers to these questions. And in parallel with the conversations and analysis around tree planting, let's also look at greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Let's look at those and see what is possible there. Let's look at various options for sequestration beyond planting trees. And finally, let's look at other options for cooling beyond decarbonization, notably solar radiation management, reflecting sunlight back into space, which marine cloud brightening is a subset of that larger class of solutions. In a nutshell, there's two ways to cool a planet that are a planet like ours, that's being heated by a star and that has an atmosphere. One is to reduce the blanket of greenhouse gases. The other is to reflect sunlight back into space. That's it. There is no third option. Those are the two. And so if this could be boiled down into a single New York Times headline, I would boil it down as follows. Is decarbonization sufficient alone to cool our planet in time, right, to avert the worst case scenarios, which we're living through right now? We're not talking about something that might happen in 2050 or 2100. We're looking at devastating wildfires, droughts, melting of ice, et cetera, right now, right? So, is decarbonization enough? If so, great. How do we do it? If not, what else do we do? And marine and solar radiation management, again, of which marine cloud brightening is a subset, are top of the list for what else can we do beyond decarbonization. So back to the thought experiment about collective intelligence. So just in the last few minutes, so many different questions. Every single slide brings up different questions that are worthy of an entire meeting and analysis. What I'm suggesting is that we fast track the whole of it, of answering all these questions by applying collective intelligence to it. So again, the thought experiment, what if we had 1,000 different conversations going on in parallel with on the order of 8 people each? That would be 8,000 participants. Now, what fraction of humanity is 8,000 people participating? Well, 8 billion divided by 8,000 is 1 million. What does that mean? If 1 in a million of us were to participate in this network of conversations, a network of 1,000 conversations spanning all of these questions with relevant experts such as Stephen participating.
Very much on what information your groups are fed with. I mean, you could have had 1 million people 2,000 years ago, and you were trying to get a decision about computer operating systems. It didn't matter how many millions you had giving advice, and they wouldn't be able to do it at all. So what the information is given to start the conversations matters a great deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, fortunately, we are in the information age, right, where there's tremendous information at our fingertips and lots of people who care and are aware of the problems and different potential solutions. What is missing is organizing ourselves into an appropriately organized network of conversations, an appropriately architected and designed network of conversations spanning all these myriad topics that we're talking about. And so just to recap what we talked about 1 week ago today, was if 1 in a million of us were participating and we organized these 1,000 different conversations with on average 8 people each. Imagine that, like this conversation, each of those was recorded, transcribed into text, and that the text transcripts that are generated in real time are also indexed in real time, thus making them searchable in real time. And with that which I just mentioned, each of these conversations in the network would then have programmatic access to what's being said in all the other conversations. And so a given conversation could select an option that might say, hey, listen, please track what we're saying and track what all the other 1,000 conversations are saying, and look at correlations. Identify which of those other conversations are talking about either the same thing, reaching similar conclusions, or perhaps even reaching opposite conclusions. You know, what if there's a really intelligent conversation that's making an argument against geoengineering, period, and they think that they've got the facts and the analysis to support that conclusion? Well, then we might send them a message and saying, hey, how'd you like to cross streams, so to speak, come together in one room? We'd like to hear your arguments because we've come to exactly the opposite conclusion. And we see what can come of it. That's just one example of ways in which these different conversations can interact with each other. I'm just giving a little taste into what I have spent most of the last 7 years of my life on, which is the field of collective intelligence, right? Networks of conversations working together to do much more than what a single brain can do. I mean, 8 people in a room can do much more than what one person can do. And 1,000 such conversations can do vastly more than what one conversation can do. And the reason this is relevant to Dear Umair is that Umair has an audience of tens of thousands of very dialed in, very intelligent, very well-informed people who, like us, read his content, gets us thinking, gets the wheels turning. Umair, you have the capability of putting out a clarion call, which will be, I think you can easily put together 8,000 people from amongst your audience. And if we can get together in advance of that and think of ways in which to organize this. I think about this all the time. There are very straightforward ways in which we can organize this into an appropriate taxonomy of topics, which can actually be generated on the fly as people get together. We talked about this at some length a week ago, so I won't repeat it or rehash it. But the bottom line is all of this matters, and it's extremely urgent. And the current way in which humanity is going about solving our problems is a way that hasn't changed fundamentally in decades, which is each of us sits down at our desk and works alone for a while and publishes something, whether it's an article or a technical paper or an email or whatever. And we put that out there, and it's received by whom it's received, who then come back and either comment or write their own articles or whatever. And the bottom line is that given the political environment in which we live, the cultural environment, we have a culture of hyper-individualism. Each of us is an island unto ourselves, which occasionally and in prescribed ways interacts with other islands. The bottom line is, yes, progress is happening, but clearly not the right kind of progress. And it's not happening fast enough. So what I'm proposing is that we experiment with and implement forms of collective intelligence, which have the potential to accelerate dramatically our rate of progress overall, not just at evolving technical solutions such as marine cloud brightening and getting those funded and implemented, but also solutions in the realms of cultural transformation, political transformation, economic transformation, which Umair writes a lot about. He's a PhD economist, used to write for the Harvard Business Review, published several books, extremely well qualified in not just economics, but many myriad other fields, which is why so many of us love Umair and his writings. So I am putting out both a very gentle at the same time, a very urgent call for Umair to in turn put out a clarion call that we give this a shot.
Yep. Be happy to do that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. And I know it's very late there in Scotland, and you've been very generous with your time. Any other comments, either from you, Stephen, or anyone else before you need to go? And you're welcome to stay as long as you want, of course.
I'd quite like to get to bed. I've got a lot of work to do tomorrow. So I'll unless there's any last questions from anybody, I will bail out now. Anybody?
I have a question, and that is, as I understand, it's an absolutely natural solution what you have found.
Yes, the amount of salt that's thrown up now by breaking waves is enormously much more than we will need to use. I mean, I think it's 0.03% is what we want. A lot of it's different size. It's all different sizes. A lot of it will fall out quite quickly, and some of it will be so small that it'll stay there forever. But all we're doing is picking the sweet size, the best swat, and giving that this particular narrow range of drop sizes the best ones for nucleation. So it is quite natural. We're not using any new materials. We're not introducing any new chemicals into the sea, and what we make will fall back in the sea within a few days.
It's like a gift. It's like a gift for the planet.
Yeah.
I'm so amazed. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, and before you go, Steve, I mean, the amazing thing here is what we're talking about is a way which simply buttresses and expands upon a very natural process. Salt water going into the air, creating clouds. We're not talking about, dumping chemicals either into the ocean or the stratosphere or anything like that, which makes some of those solutions essentially politically impossible, socially impossible, culturally impossible, right? And which have also given the broad field of geoengineering a very bad name, right? Humanity as a whole is essentially throwing out the baby with the bathwater of geoengineering. And yes, as we say out in the country, there's a lot of turds in that bathwater. And so yes, there's a tremendous impulse to say, throw the whole thing out, everything in the bathtub, just get rid of it all, right? And
also, if you decide that you don't want to do it, it's one mouse click to have everybody stopping doing it, and then in about 3 or 4 days, it's all forgotten. It's completely reversible. Our rivals with stratospheric sulfur have to get it exactly right to begin with, and they're stuck with their decision for a year or so. But we have a high frequency response in a short life.
Exactly. Anyway, we'll continue talking here unless there's any other quick questions or comments for Stephen. We're going to let Stephen get to bed.
Just a comment. I think the name Marine Cloud Brightening is such a good name. It's so positive. It's so inspiring. So again, thank you.
It's the right name for it.
It's so beautiful name.
Marine cloud brightening our future.
Yeah.
I got to go.
Stephen,
thank you so
much. Thank you. We'll send you a link to this and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great night and a great weekend. All right. I say we take a little pause for,
I will sign off.
Freed.
That was absolutely brilliant.
All right, then let's postpone our pause. So Freed, we can just have at least a few more minutes with you, since I really love your inputs. But yes, my goodness, absolutely brilliant. This is an example of what emerges from collective intelligence when we give it a chance, right? I'm calling our old modality of communication and collaboration, each of us working as an island, publishing something, putting it out there. I'm being kind of brutal when I call that collective stupidity. Yes, it's collective intelligence, but it's so disconnected and it's so fragmented. And crucially, when combined with our current mode of production of the global economy, to use terminology that Umair is extremely comfortable with, our current mode of production can be encapsulated in a few words. It is unfettered, unlimited individual hoarding. For what purpose? So that individuals can do great things out in the world? No. For individual self-aggrandizement. Mansions, yachts, right? Vast properties for hunting and horseback riding and whatever else, with no regard for the impacts on the biosphere, the planet, et cetera, et cetera. So it's our mode of production of infinite hoarding at the level of individuals. For a good purpose? No, for an absurd purpose of individual aggrandizement. So it is, the root of it is hyper-individualism, right? And separation, both from each other. So we're separate from each other and we're separate from nature, right? Fried, you've got a comment, go for it.
Yes, one point to stress again, because Professor Salter has said it before, that it would need 400 vessels. You can extend it to 500 vessels, and each vessel 2 million, what is it, $4 million? $4 million. So for $2 billion, the whole world can be cooled down. I think this is also so amazing. And he said before recording, he said that the COP21 in Glasgow, the safety measures are even more than that. Only the safety measures.
Or wasn't it
So
COP26?
Yeah, COP26.
COP26 in Glasgow, 21 in November, as I understand. So for a fraction of the cost of the COP21, COP26, this solution can be done.
It's absurdly inexpensive. It's ridiculously inexpensive.
Yeah.
And the planetary cooling is just the beginning, because like we talked about, there's the macro of cooling the planet as a whole, but then also the myriad micro details of increasing precipitation in Australia in their summer to prevent wildfires and stop them. There's reducing precipitation in Eastern Africa to reduce devastating flooding. There's reducing or eliminating hurricanes, reducing the melting of Arctic ice, saving the polar bears. There's myriad local impacts, but all of those combined are overshadowed by the big prize, which is cooling the planet. We've got to first stop this exponential planetary overheating and then actually reverse it. Because all that's happening right now is just this runaway accelerating train of exponential planetary overheating. We need real solutions. We need practical solutions. We need them now, not 10 years from now, not 50 years from now. Now. We could have an ice-free Arctic. Yeah, go ahead.
It's possible. We heard it.
We're talking about, in very simple terms, this is not a moonshot. This is not like putting, people on the moon, which we accomplished in the 60s, for crying out loud. This is not we're not talking about putting a civilization on Mars and creating an atmosphere there. We're talking about sailboats with glorified showerhead spray nozzles, spraying water into the air. Something a 2-year-old
From the sea.
on the sea.
From the sea.
From the sea.
So no difficult systems.
Exactly. So the solution is imminently achievable, imminently achievable, right? If we put a fraction of the resources that were put into the Manhattan Project or NASA or any other major undertaking, we could have all these technological problems solved probably in a matter of months if we put the right urgency to it. Call it a couple of years, which is pretty much our window for stopping this runaway train of exponential planetary overheating, which is on track to killing us all. It's already killed a lot of us, and it's on track to killing the rest of us, not just us humans, but us life, all our sister and brother species. So again, don't take my word for it. Don't take Stephen's word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it. Jump into the collective intelligence. And let's come together, and as a collective intelligence, let us holistically answer all these vital questions together. It's not enough to have opinions anymore. We need answers. We need ironclad answers. Do we do marine cloud brightening? Yes or no? As a civilization, we need to answer that question. We don't even know how to answer questions as a civilization anymore. It's all individual. Do I buy this car or that car? Do I chop down 1,000 acres or 10,000 acres? How much money can I make? What's the ROI? Now, and Umair writes about all this, about just how omnicidal our current mode of production is. It's mode of production of economics. It's political modalities, representative democracy, totalitarianism, etc. It's the underlying paradigm of hyper-individualism, that you're an island. And as long as you're okay, everything's okay. And to hell with everyone else, it's not your problem, right? All of this needs to be holistically addressed and holistically solved. We need deep radical transformation. I love one of Umair's most recent articles, which I'd love to do a Dear Umair segment on, which is called "Our Civilization Needs a Great Transformation." And he talks about all these different dimensions. If you want to stay up for another couple hours, Freed, we can do it. Otherwise, we can save it till Monday or whenever. But he talks about many different dimensions across which we need transformation. Moral, political, economic, et cetera, et cetera. So, Umair, all this fits within your framework, your thinking. This is one specific dimension. It's planetary overheating. Absolutely essential for survival that we stop it and reverse it. But we're not treating this as an island unto itself. When we come together as 8,000 of us to do this initial mega event of 1,000 conversations as a network, truly networked, hyper networked together in the ways that I talked about: recording, transcription, indexing, search, bots, automated, signaling and whatnot, so that we can merge together those rooms that need to merge together, pass messages between those rooms that need to get concise summaries of what the other rooms are talking about, et cetera, et cetera. When we do that, when we finally get 8,000 of us together in 1,000 networked conversations, what's going to happen? Amazing things. And it's all published, going to be published, transcribed, recorded, everything. And what'll then happen? A week later, when we show up again, instead of 8,000, it'll be 80,000, because each of us will be going crazy at how amazing it was. And each of us will reach out to all our friends and say, get your butt in here, right? Chad, you need to be here. You need to experience this, right? More was recorded in our last session than you can ever watch in your whole lifetime. But that's not the point. The point is to show up at the next one. Show up as you are. No one of us has all the answers, right? But all of us coming together in this hyper network, collectively intelligent way, we can come up with all the answers that we need. 8,000 the first week, 80,000 the next week, 800,000 the next week, and so on. We're talking about an exponential growth in collective intelligence leading to, drum roll, collective superintelligence, which we talked about last week, and we read an excerpt from Nick Bostrom and his excellent book called Superintelligence, right? He's professor at Oxford or Cambridge. It's escaping me at the moment. Doesn't matter, but he's just this mega stud when it comes to artificial intelligence and all that. He's also written about collective intelligence. It's time to do this. Writing about it is cool. Talking about it is cool. It's time to do it. And for that, we need you, Umair, to put out the clarion call. And we're happy to work with you to figure out what that clarion call should be. Join us. Join us. With that, I pass the talking feather. Fried, looks like you need to head to bed. I totally respect that. Great having you here, Fried. Thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you, buddy. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone. And good night for here. Yes, it's 10:40. So bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Fried. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.
Great weekend to you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Marco, what do you say? Shall we take a break for a few minutes? Let's pause recording. All right, after a little break, back at it. I think between last Friday, September 10th recording, which we published on September 14th, and today, I think we've covered really the salient points. We need holistic transformation across what I'm referring to rather casually as the entire hyperobject of transformation, the entire hyperobject of all these dimensions of culture, economics, politics, managing as if it could be managed. But indeed, why not? Managing humanity's footprint on the planet, positive and negative, right? And again, why not? Right? Listen, if we're really going to make a go of this, of saving, healing, and transforming life on Earth, we might as well shoot for the stars, right? And, as my ancestor, William Whipple, who signed the Declaration of Independence, my middle name is Whipple, in honor of him, as they said when they were signing the Declaration of Independence, if this is going to be treason, let's make the most of it, right? Let's not just go for, small incremental improvements. Let's do it right. Not that the United States is any shining example to write home about, but there are kernels of wisdom and success, even amidst the omnicidal tragedy that has been American empire. So, bottom line, as I said a week ago, and we're just about to publish this, so Umair probably doesn't even know about Dear Umair yet. He will soon, as soon as we publish this, publish the whole series and the invitation for everyone to join us. We've given collective stupidity in the form of hyper-individualism and unlimited individual hoarding and as the mode of production, and representative democracy, representative totalitarianism, non-representative totalitarianism. We've given all of that a really good run in the past 10,000, 12,000 years since the agricultural revolution. And look at where it's gotten us. It's time for a new paradigm. And I am convinced that collective intelligence is at the heart of that new paradigm. And, just like Stephen Salter says about his ships, with a click of a mouse, you can turn them all off. We can always go back to collective stupidity if we don't like what collective intelligence is doing for us. But let's at least give it a try. Collective intelligence. Because if we start with 8,000 one week, the next week it can be 80,000. It's going to be so transformational, but let's just give it a try, right? And I mean, in terms of each of us expanding our reach, my goodness, Umair, you'll become incredibly famous in a very short period of time if you're the one who puts out the clarion call. The clarion call will be put out. I think that, Umair, you have the best odds of success of putting it out and really having a transformational impact in terms of all of humanity in the course of history if you put it out. So we're going to gently keep after you for this incredible, radical, benevolent revolution that is just on the cusp. I mean, this whole downward slide into fascism, totalitarianism, absolutely unlimited hoarding for individual aggrandizement. This just cannot stand. We just can't take much more of this. We've got to try something new. Anyway, with that, I'm basically complete for the moment. Passing the feather.
I think from my perspective, if we can, organize something like, and I might not even have this right, the World Soccer League or whatever they're called, that organization and the effort we'll put in to, support a team to do something that is purely entertainment and profit. Why would we half-ass saving the planet? Why would we put half effort or anything less than 100% effort into solving the problem of global warming by bringing everyone together to do all the parts that are necessary? And there's plenty of parts, solar radiation management, commonly SRM, along with decarbonization, and the the solar radiation management to buy the time we need. It will cool the planet to buy the time we need to implement decarbonization methods, drawdown methods of different kinds. And we can make it happen here. And Umair, you could help us make it happen faster by interacting with your audience and bringing these things to their attention. So look forward to hearing from you.
And bringing your whole audience together in conversation. Oh my goodness, what could be more exciting? All righty, well, let's make it happen. I've got my work cut out for me. We've got to get this all published and up on dearumair.org and on its own YouTube playlist and into the comment space of your amazing articles, Umair. So with that, I'm complete. What do you say, Marco? Take your time.
I'm complete. I cannot see how if somebody can spend as little as a half hour, they'll leave with so much knowledge about solar radiation management that they shouldn't be able to wait to share the news that there's hope. We don't have to just keep listening to these dire predictions, and that all we do is set a goal for reducing pollution and don't even set about to put together a program to achieve the goal. We've set the goal, our work is done. This attitude has to, we need to be done with that.
Totally. And I'll just say it one more time. If there's a better way, if it's planting trees, fine, let's do the analysis, let's come to that conclusion, and then let's work on a viable way to plant that many trees in time. I really think it's going to be a combination of all these solutions. We don't just need to plant trees. We need to get the heck out of nature's way and end large-scale industrial animal agriculture, if not all of animal agriculture. And there's open questions there too, with a nod to Alan Savory and his work. Look at his YouTube video on reversing desertification, for example. I really think it's going to be just myriad different solutions, which is precisely why we need collective superintelligence to integrate them all into a single global movement to finally challenge the death grip that totalitarianism and economic totalitarianism has on us right now as a planet. We've got to break free from the death grip, and we offer collective superintelligence as one vector for achieving that.
Absolutely. The collective intelligence will help in planning and implementation. There's so much you can do. You know, if you don't think collective intelligence is efficient, go watch an anthill for a couple hours. See what they can get done.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. And that's what they can do with a few, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of neurons per ant, right? It's just mind-boggling. What can we do with our, I don't know how many billions or trillions of neurons each of us has, but then networked into not an ant colony, but a human colony, right? Focused on saving, healing, and transforming life on Earth. I think we'll run circles around the old paradigm and the old mechanisms, Fox News, et cetera, and even some of the more enlightened paradigms, New York Times, whatever. It's all collective stupidity until we get it together. We've got to get it together. Let's give it a shot.
Less complaining, more doing.
All righty. Well, I'm complete. Marco, I give you the last words.
We can do this. The key being we.
Beautiful.
I'm complete.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us on this episode of Dear Umair. Meet Stephen Salter and join us next time. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Marco, and thanks to everyone.